what are you going to teach this time in the Jyotish Kumbh? Because many of the students want to know a little more than the title of your subject.
Sure. Well, as I told you, I just fell in love with the Jaimini system, and it's become something of a speciality. And when the first class I ever taught online was the Jaimini class, and the first book I ever wrote was The Essentials of Jaimini. I love this system. I love teaching this system. It's not as commonly known or used, and therefore I find, students who have not been exposed to it before maybe have an interest. So my presentations are going to be on Jaimini, and the first one is going to be, as everyone probably knows, at least listening to this, in Jaimini we have these special karakas based on degrees, right? And then the dashas are not planetary periods.
Do you use 7 karakas or 8 karakas?
Well, I'm a student of Kan Rao's, so that should tell you that I use 7 karakas only, right? 7 karakas only. And I correlate those with the first 7 houses, roughly anyway, with the first 7 houses of the horoscope.
But do you have an answer to those who want to include Rahu in it?
Well,
as 8 karakas.
Well, I've studied all the arguments about them. I've seen what's, in Parashara Hora. And, we can, this is a controversy and we can argue it to death. I'm just saying that I found 7 karaka system to be the one that has worked for me and is what's given me predictive success. That's all I can say. All right. So, everyone has to make a choice.
There is no argument that clinches it either on this side or that side.
Well, there is in my mind, because, the confusion comes in is that in that chapter where he's giving the karakas, Sage Jaimini uses the word va, 7 or 8, va. This is what creates all the confusion, right? That word va, which means or.
Which means the controversy existed at the time of Parashara.
That could be. Now, what he then utilized himself and advocated, of course, it's anybody's guess. I'm interested in what works. And what always impressed me about what I learned from Kan Rao.
But the trouble is that people who believe in Rahu, they say their system works.
Yes, I know. And my answer to that is that God bless them. Let them use their system and let them predict with that. I'm going to use my 7 karakas and I'm going to predict with that. And I'll show you how I do that. So coming back to my topic, I entitled it Elegant Simplicity, because what I love about the Jaimini system is the way in which oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes events can come out in a very simple, straightforward way. And let me just give you an example of that using my own chart. I live in a beautiful area of Southern California near the ocean. It's called Cardiff by the Sea. I'm very blessed to be in this kind of environment. But for a long time, the idea of buying a house here was out of reach for me because the property values are astronomical. Okay? But then I saw that I was going to be moving into my Taurus period. And Taurus has Venus, but the karaka it is the MK, the planet with the 4th highest degrees, which is like all the significations in the way I teach Jaimini, carries all the significations of the 4th house, including home and property. So I saw I was moving into this period in 2004, and so I thought to myself, wow, this would be a period when maybe I could finally buy a home. And I won't, go into all the details.
And your 4th lord is in a watery sign, Jupiter, in Pisces.
Near the ocean.
Yeah.
So, and so not only that, it's the 9th house. So long story short, I was finally getting in a position where I was able to buy this lovely home that I'm now in. But I decided I wanted to build a temple in the back. And it's not just the MK in Taurus, Venus has its own sign, but it's in the 9th house, which of course rules temples. And then I'll tell you a Kan Rao story. He had predicted a long time ago that I would be involved in temple building. At the time, I couldn't imagine what that would mean, right? Couldn't imagine what that would mean. And I forgot about the prediction. But then, I remembered it when I built this temple in the back of my house. So I wrote to him, told him about this. He writes back, and you've installed 3 deities, which was absolutely correct. How he knew that, I have no idea. But this is what he said, and he was absolutely correct. So what I'm trying to say is that when I say elegant simplicity, Sometimes it can be as simple as that you run a sign containing one of these karakas, and it indicates clearly that an event related to the meanings of that karaka can take place. For example, if you're running the sign containing the DK, planet with the fewest degrees, Dara karaka, indicator of spouse, this can indicate a time when a person marries. If they're running a sign containing the PK, planet with the fifth highest degrees, like unto the meanings of the fifth house, such as children, you can have children. And I have example after example about predictions I made based on this kind of very simple, elegant principle. The AMK, which in the Gemini system, planet with the second highest degrees, as you know, can be something of a career significator, that when you run the period containing the AMK, this can be a time when you can experience professional rise. It was absolutely true for me. And I can show innumerable examples of where it's been true for others. Now, it can get much more complicated than that. I'm not saying it always comes out that simply, but very often it does. And this is, you're not doing all this complex analysis. You're not using divisional charts. You're just looking at two factors. A person's running this sign, it contains this karaka, and then events related to the karaka's meaning come out. That's elegant simplicity. And this is what I'm going to be teaching about in my first presentation. The second presentation, as you know, there are special Gemini lagnas that are used, chief among those being Karakamsha lagna, right? Determined by seeing the planet with the highest degrees, the Atmakaraka, its placement by sign in the Vamsha, and then using that as a lagna, both back in the birth chart, but also in the Vamsha itself. Call it Karakamsha in the birth chart, called Swamsha in the Vamsha, as K and Rao does. Well, there are 124 sutras in the second pada of the first chapter of the Gemini Sutras that are devoted to the effects of planets from Karakamsha lagna. And there are very interesting sutras that when they appear in a person's chart, these combinations, I've found them to be exceedingly valid and very true. Again, I'll use my own chart as an example. My Karakamsha lagna is Scorpio. And from Scorpio, Jupiter is the fifth lord in the fifth house. Well, there's Gemini Sutras that says when this is the case, a man will study Veda and Vedanga, and the man will author, right? Both of which, of course, has been very, very true for me. So what I'm going to be going into in this second presentation is I'm not going to have time to look at all of them, but select a number of sutras about the effects of planets of Karakamsha lagna and show illustrations both in terms of the charts of famous people and how these combinations can be seen to have played themselves out, or also just from predictions I've made. Take the chart, I'm not a Trump fan at all, okay, Donald Trump fan, but you look at his chart, and one of the sutras says that when Mercury falls in the 10th house from Karakamsha lagna with the additional aspect of a benefic, a person is very successful in their line of work. Well, his Karakamsha lagna is Virgo. The 10th from there has Mercury in its own sign, getting Rashi Drishti from Jupiter. Mercury is actually the MK. And what was he before he got a politician? He was a real estate mogul, right? And so his chart is a perfect illustration of one of the sutras given in the chapter on the effects of planets from Karakamsha lagna. So this will be the topic of my second presentation that I'm excited about going, because I just love talking about Gemini and the Gemini system.
Hey, K.N. Rao asked me also to teach Gemini, and I did that for a couple of semesters, and I enjoyed it immensely. But after that, I lost interest in it, and now I'm picking it up back for the last 2-3 years. So,
oh, really? Really? So you've come back to it?
No, but I'm not going to leave Parashari. Parashari is still my first love.
Okay, all right. Well, believe me, I always use them together, but I would say that Gemini is what I really love.
Oh, yeah. What is your relationship with Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan now?
Well, when I left corporate life, this would have been in October 2012, and then was much free. I had much more time. I could do what I wanted to do. So then I started being invited to speak. They have an international conference each year, and so I was invited to present at that conference, and I was invited to start having my articles published in their journal, the Journal of Astrology. And so that went on for a period of years. Actually, I ended up being able to teach in Russia. Kay and Rao had been going to Russia, for years and years. So when one of the Russian students saw me present at the international conference, they invited me, along with Kay and Rao, to go to Russia. When it came down just the day before he was to leave, his health didn't permit him to go. So it was myself and one of his faculty members, who I'm sure you know, Deepak Basaria. We ended up going to Russia. Basaria Ji really liked to consult. I liked to teach. So I ended up teaching. He ended up doing all the consulting. And at that point is when the Russian students then started inviting me back. And I probably have more Russian students than I have students in the U.S. It's kind of an interesting, sort of development that I would have never anticipated. But the Russian students are very, very enthusiastic about Jyotish, and I love teaching them.
Yeah, I know that. We have been teaching quite a few batches of the Russian and the Ukrainian students. I and Dr. Charak for a long time. And not only they're enthusiastic, they're pretty sharp, most of them.
Oh, some of them are brilliant.
Yeah.
Quite brilliant.
What would be your advice for the young students who intend to make astrology their profession?
I would advise them not to make it their profession.
Why? If they follow your example, you're a successful one.
You have to understand that for most of my adult life, I was never a professional astrologer. It was always just something that was a passion and interest of mine. And I earned my living in other ways. It's only been since I retired from corporate life that I've devoted myself full-time to Jyotish. And there's a difference between what I would call an academic Jyotish, someone who researches, or someone who teaches, someone who authors versus practitioner. I'm sort of making a joke, but my joke these days is that whenever I go to teach, it seems like everybody and their brother is becoming an astrologer, and the problem is that very few people go through a systematic training and then do enough practice, get enough experience where they become competent Jyotishis. And, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, as you know. My advice would be is to learn the subject systematically from the ground up. What I see as being a problem, especially with all the YouTube presentations, students are hearing about these very advanced, very esoteric, very non-mainstream sort of things. Before they even, I use the analogy, they try to live in a house before they built the foundation. They're trying to live in the upper stories of the house, and it doesn't work. Another analogy I use, they're trying to read Shakespeare and they haven't learned the alphabet yet, right? So, learn in a systematic step-by-step from the ground floor up, from a competent teacher who teaches in that way, and then start, absorbing the classics. And then what I said previously, just start working on charts. Then Jyotish will teach you Jyotish. So that's my advice. I had started to kind of jump into all these sort of things when I first became a student. Then I realized I was not benefiting from that. I decided to kind of go back and just, again, step by step, build a foundation that then becomes the basis for going into the more, advanced techniques and so on. I usually encourage people to learn the Parashari system well before they learn Jaimini. You can learn them simultaneously. I did, but I'd had a background in astrology for 20 years. But when someone wants to study with me, I usually insist that they become quite proficient in the Parashari system before they can study Jaimini. That's just my point of view.
I agree with you. I would advise the same. Any new books that you may be bringing up in the next 6 months or 1 year?
Yes, I'm always writing books now, usually more than one simultaneously.
Simultaneously.
I wrote I did a course on actually I wanted to my background is counseling psychology. For a period of time, I worked as a psychotherapist. I still had to study psychopathology. So I thought I was in a good position to write what I would consider to be a landmark book, because I haven't seen anything on this topic, a separate book, The Astrology of Mental and Emotional Illness. And I taught a 9-week course to that, both to a group of Russians and then also other students online. And whenever I teach a course, I always hand out a fully articulated written lesson each week of an 8-week course, and then I end up with a book. So I've written that material, and now I'm shaping it up in a book. Right now, I'm teaching a class on all the conditional nakshatra-based dashas, like Dvi Saptatami Samadasha, Shatura Shidi Samadasha, all those 9 conditional nakshatra-based dashas that are given in Parashara Hora. I'm now writing a book on that. And I'm coming out with a book on the effects of planets from Karakamsha Lagna. That's been included in some of the Jaimini courses I've taught, but I've never come out with a separate book on that with an original translation and commentary on those sutras in the second pada of the first chapter of the Jaimini Sutras. Of course, I always look to try to illustrate them with examples of the charts of famous world personalities or of case studies where I made predictions based on these principles. So those are the 3 books that I currently have in progress. Not sure when they'll come out, when God wills it, I guess. But those are the ones I'm working on.
Okay. How would you motivate a young student who hates Gemini to study Gemini?
Yeah, well,
because he's been so much in Parashari and he feels comfortable with Parashari that he doesn't like Gemini, because Gemini in any case is fraught with too many controversies.
No, it's a good question. It's a good question. The way I would motivate them is I would take their own chart and I would take their life events and I would show them how those life events are coming out in the Jaimini system, and sometimes the way in which they come out again with an elegant simplicity. Just before this conversation, Vinay, I was teaching an advanced course in Jaimini to an advanced set of students. And I was showing them a chart of the famous tennis player, Steffi Graf, famous women's tennis player. She married in her Pisces period. If you look in Virgo, there's Jupiter as the Darakaraka. Simple. So by showing them these things, my experience is when I show these things to students, they're interested in learning Jaimini.
Good. Of course, the entire study of astrology works on this basis. Those who don't believe in it, tell them a few things and they become interested. That happens over and over again.
Yes, it does. These are good questions.
I'm a bit confused about a couple of things about Karakansha. I don't know if it would be a bit too technical at this stage to talk about them, because you have yet to teach Karakansha. Because when we read the Gemini Sutrams for Karakansha, they would say that if Jupiter or Mercury are in the second or in the third or in the fourth or even the fifth or in the ninth, this is the result. So this seems to me stretching of a point to a limit where it doesn't work anymore. So if it is in the second, so if that is the sutra, fine, I accept it. If it is in the fifth and then you give a sutra, I understand and it's fine. But so many variations of that, how can that possibly be working in actual life?
Well, then I would have to look at the specific sutras that you're talking about. One of the big issues with Jaimini, and I'm sorry if this gets a little technical, is the word tatra in Sanskrit. Tatra means therein, placed therein. That's what it means literally. But, in the Jaimini Sutras, as you well know, the bhava, the house, is indicated by taking a Sanskrit word and turning it into a number, right? And I won't go into the technicality of how that happens. Tatra means in the second from. So there are Jaimini Sutras that some scholars say, no, Tatra means the planet's placed there. And some say, no, it means it's placed second from there, right? So there are these controversies. And again, I address these in my book, The Essentials of Jaimini. And again, what I'm interested in is what works. Now, you're right. If you're saying that the same result can happen from 2 planets here, 2 planets there, 2 planets there, it doesn't become something you can utilize. It doesn't become something valid.
And then over and above that, they would also say that this would work from the Karkansh Lagna in the Rashi chart.
Well,
not in Navamsha chart. I mean, Navamsha chart, of course, is a separate entity. But it would work if you consider that sign as the Lagna where the Karkansha is.
No.
So the same formula worked E1 and D1.
It can. Again, if you do Jaimini in the style of K and Rao, you would use Karkamsha as this Lagna, call it Karkamsha in the birth log, but use the same Lagna. And what you're always looking for is confluence, right? You're looking whether, indications agree. Let me take an example. There are combinations for authorship given in this chapter. Basically, what it says, if the natural benefics, particularly the moon and Jupiter, are influencing either the Karkamsha Lagna or the fifth from there, then a person can be someone who's an author. How successful an author they are depends upon additional factors, particularly if it's the moon and Jupiter involved. This can give the greatest success as an author. Well, I wrote a book called Literary Love Affair, where I took the charts of all these famous authors, right? All these famous authors. And I applied those combinations. I applied them. And you'll see that in situations where they apply both in the birth chart and in the Vamsha is where you have a person who was probably the most successful and famous author. So again, this idea of confluence, right?
Then there's a sutra that says that it would work even from the birth lagna.
Well, this is the other
where
thing.
the Karkansha and Atmakarka are out of it. Even that becomes a formula.
Well, but what you have to understand is what I came to realize is these combinations that are given from Karkamsha Lagna will apply from other Lagnas as well. In other words, they'll apply from, they don't apply just exclusively from Karkamsha Lagna. They can be applied really virtually to any Lagna, and you can see them working. You can even apply them from Dasha Lagna, meaning that...
Yeah, that makes sense, of course.
Yeah. But you see, there's the idea of some period showing a potential. Whether that potential will become actual, I would never make that judgment just based on the one system, be it Jaimini or Parashari. What I need to have them do is that both the systems be showing the same trend at the same time. This is what, as you know, K and Rao referred to as the composite technique, and this is what I teach and what has, I believe, given me my predictive success. I will use not just 2 dashas, not just Vimshotri or Chara, but I might be using 2 or 3 or 4 dashas to try to zero in on a specific event like marriage or childbirth. There are some dashas that are conditional, both in the Parashari system and the Jaimini system, that when they apply, in some respects, there's the hint in the Shastra that they should take precedence. Right? So when, for example, the 7th Lord is in the 1st or the 1st Lord is in the 7th, then this dasha, which only applies about 9% of horoscopes, Dwi Saptatami Samadasha, applies. I recently used that to make a prediction, but I made that prediction because the same trend that I was seeing in that dasha was also showing in Chara, was also showing in Vimshotri. Might have been in a different way, but they were all pointing in the same direction. Right? This had to do with childbirth. So, it's when you get that agreement between systems that it gives you the feeling that you're seeing something that is actual. If I don't see that, it's more of a question to me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. Can we take some questions now?
Sure.
Scott is asking everyone, what impact do you think retrograde Mercury and Saturn have had on your teaching and writing or astrological career? Anything specific?
Well, retrograde planets are probably the most difficult thing. The behavior of retrograde planets is probably the most unpredictable and difficult thing to sort of parse out. There are some Jyotishis that would teach because in Chestabala, in motional strength, in Chadbala, a full additional rupal comes about when a planet is retrograde. So you'd had some people take the position that it actually can be a source of strength. Kay and Rao, as you're probably aware, talked about how they can act unpredictably, sometimes giving quite the reverse of what they pretend. They don't protect, retrograde benefics don't protect in medical astrology, as Dr. Charak teaches. I found that principle to be quite true. As to my own chart, what a retrograde Mercury, retrograde Saturn has meant, I'm quite a backward individual. I don't know, I'm just joking. Sometimes...
we've been seeing how backward you are during the last 1 hour.
Exactly. And retrograde Mercury, when I write, I sometimes get the sentence structure, I have to have somebody help me edit it because I sometimes get the sentence structure in what would not be the right order. That might be a function of my sort of retrograde Mercury. Retrograde Saturn, as the sixth lord in the first, it's going to cause some health problems in my Saturn period. It has a retrograde malefic as the sixth lord in the first. Fortunately, there's some protection with the aspect of Jupiter from the seventh. It's a complex sort of thing. I don't have an easy and ready answer for that, quite frankly, and I acknowledge that.
Okay, there's another question here. Michael Sugarman writes, if this conversation went another 6 hours, I would listen to every minute. But before that, I would go to sleep. The last part is, I have added.
that sounds like Michael.
Yeah, there were quite a few things on my chat. Where have they gone? Just a moment. Saurabh or Meenakshi, can you look at some of the other questions?
Yes, Vinayji, I will look into the questions.
Yeah, I've got this question now. It is, what changes will Rahu Dasha bring to the native? Rahu Mahadasha and Shani Antardasha, the dreaded combination.
Well, it's funny that this person should ask if you send me their email, I'll send them. I wrote an article called Iron and Steel. That was the title, and it's about Rahu Saturn and Saturn Rahu periods, and they are ones to pay attention to. But I showed instances where, in the context of a particular chart, they gave really great results, and then they have a bad reputation for a reason, because I showed many examples of people running that period and sub-period where it gave extremely unfavorable results. Now, we have this principle, as you know, that natural malefics collecting in the Trishadais 3, 6, and 11 can give an unusual type of Raja Yoga, right? And I was just actually this morning, I was showing the horoscope of this movie star Mel Gibson, who is Gemini Lagna, has a collection of Rahu, Saturn, and Mars in his sixth house. They also fall third from the moon. He became a big international movie star in his Rahu period. Right? And so, and I in that article, Iron and Steel, I give many examples. And then, we have this very interesting verse in Parashara Hora in the chapter on Raja Yoga, where it says, natural malefics collecting in the Trishadai, while all the benefics are in Kendras, also produce a Raja Yoga. And I have shown examples of that, and I actually predicted on that basis before where it came out accurately. So like anything, what any period and subperiod is going to bring depends upon the context of those planets in the chart, not just the Rashi, but also key divisional charts. So you can't make, you might say, big generalizations. You'll go wrong. That said, obviously, Saturn and Rahu are two also unqualified marakas, and I can show you any number, I could show you any number of examples where that period and sub-period proved very bad for the person in terms of the bodily suffering, and sometimes they died in that period, right? Irrespective of them becoming primary marakas by any other ways. So again, it's always, you can never make these K and Rao used to say push button predictions based on, just these gross, these big generalizations. It's always an evaluation of those two grahas in the chart in terms of what they're going to bring as far as their period and subperiod.
Yeah, there is another question here. Mark, what is your favorite book written by you and one written by K and Rao?
My favorite book of K and Rao is easy. It's Yogi's Destiny and the Wheel of Time. I just love that.
Which we had printed.
Yes, I know.
Yeah.
And my second favorite book is Predicting with Jaimi's Charadasha, which for 20 years in a row, once a year, I read that book and I came to understand more and more what it was saying. So my two favorite books of his are Yogi's Destiny and Wheel of Time, because it's all about the astrology of spirituality and his experiences of meeting great saints and sages in his life. Loved that book. And then as far as just something I learned so much from, it was in the Jaimi Charadasha. My favorite book of my own, which also happens to be my bestseller, is my book, The Essentials of Jaimini.
Okay. There is another book by K and Rao which I really admire, and that is the Nehru Dynasty.
Yes.
It all came much before Bharati Vidya Bhavan started and all that. It's one of the masterpieces by a master. And it would show another writer how to write a book, how to bring out the various things. And I haven't seen any other author who brings that kind of technical brilliance to the analysis of a chart, because most other people just write just a few things which they want to illustrate and leave the rest. But here, since he was doing a whole biographical sketch, he's gone to the depths of the chart in so many different ways that is quite illustrative and inspiring.
I couldn't agree more. And it's from that book that I got the hint that when from a particular Dasha Lagna in Jaimini, two planets exchange, the nature of the exchange can be quite significant. He makes a little hint about this because Indira Gandhi first became prime minister in her Scorpio major period. You probably know in her chart, Mars and the Sun exchange. The Sun's in Scorpio, Mars is in Leo. So for using Scorpio as a Dasha Lagna, that now exchange becomes 110. And he refers to this.
Yes.
It's easy to miss it if you don't understand what's being said. But that really made an impression on me. And in my articles I wrote an article about that, showing all these examples of how when an exchange becomes very favorable from a particular Dasha Lagna, this is something to pay attention to.
I read another formula, not in Gemini, but normal, that if there is an exchange between the 6th Lord and the 7th Lord, which can spoil your marriage, but it can be great for your profession, because this exchange between the 6th and the 7th Lord is actually the exchange between the 9th and the 10th Lords from the 10th house.
The 10th house, yes.
So that comes out brilliantly, very often.
Yes, very good. Love that.
There is another question here. Nirukta Jyotish, to the point practical astrology. Mark, as you have Saturn in Virgo, that's why your topics are in systematic order.
That's correct. That's why I advocate a very systematic step-by-step approach, because that's just an expression of me and my, you might say, psychological makeup. And so that's true. That's not a question. They're just making an observation, or they're asking me if I think that's right.
In fact, there are a couple of similarities between your chart and mine.
Is that right?
My Saturn is also in the Lagna, and in Virgo I have my moon.
Uh-huh. Which Lagna? What's your birth Lagna?
Leo.
Okay, I see. Very good.
So the 6th Lord in the Lagna.
Yes, we share that.
Yeah. Any other questions here? Pinakshi?
Yes, Vinayji, there is a question. It looks like, would you please leave the book names here? she is asking. So I can do that
Okay.
for her.
Okay.
There is, I think Nilima ji is asking a question. Would it depend on which Rashi and Nakshatra in Rahu is placed in for a Rahu Dasha?
Of course. Nilima ji doesn't need to ask such a question because the answer is so obviously yes. And as Mark has very clearly said, that every such question actually has to be referred to the actual chart. And no...
Nilima, what are you asking? Can I ask you directly? What are you asking?
Well, what I was thinking is when people were mentioning about this Rahu-Saturn period, so if Rahu is placed in a benefic Rashi and a benefic Nakshatra, that period may not be as challenging as placed in a malefic Rashi and a malefic Nakshatra.
Well, in general, as Vinay well knows, when the Rahu and Ketu are in the signs of benefics, aspected by benefics, and without malefic influence, they can actually give very, very benign, very, very favorable results. In my writing, I've showed innumerable examples of this sort of thing. So, yeah, but it just, again, gets back to the individual disposition of Rahu. What house is it in? What sign is it in? You know, what are the associations with it in order to judge the results? Particularly being a Chaya Graha, it's going to give the results of what it's associated with.
Nilima, in fact, you're referring only to the benefic Rashi alone.
That's right.
In fact, there is much more to it. For example, what nakshatras Rahu and Ketu are in, and Shani is in. There it would also be definitely involving what is happening in the Navansha of Rahu. And then also, of course, Dashmansha, because many times the results are in the field of your career rather than in your personal life. So things of that kind.
What about if Rahu and Saturn are placed 5-9 from each other, or 2-12, or 6-8 from each other?
Well, 6-8 is, of course, not so good, but depending on so many other things. But 5-9 could also be a problematic thing.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
But much less than 6-8.
Indira Gandhi, Nilima, Indira Gandhi's Saturn's in the first house, Rahu's in the sixth. They're 6-8 from each other. Saturn's a primary Marika, and she was assassinated in Saturn Rahu.
Saturn Rahu, that's fine.
But, you know, again, it just has to be, you can look at those dispositions from each other. I think I've shown you, well, in Indira Gandhi, when she ran Rahu Saturn in Saptamsha, not in the birth chart, in Saptamsha, Saturn falls fifth from Rahu. And I've seen over and over again where a sub-period lord falls fifth in D7 from a major period lord. This period and sub-period gives a child. It applies to your chart, Nilima.
It does. It does.
Right?
Yes.
So again, you always have to see it in the context.
There is a question here by Umesh. And so out of the target of 100,000 charts in 10 years, where are you now?
Well, I didn't say it was 100,000.
You said 10,000.
No, I said, he said thousands of charts. He said thousands of charts. And over a 10-year period, I didn't count. But I'm sure I looked at, at least 1,000 charts. Where am I now? I have no idea. I've been doing Jyotish full time since 2013. And, with all the writing that I've done, I would say many thousands. And I learned something from every one of them. Every one of them. Or it reinforces something that I already know. Or I learned something new. That's what I mean by working on charts. Jyotish will teach you Jyotish.
There's another interesting question by Umesh. He says, is Rahu in Cancer considered a benefic? This is puzzling since Rahu and Moon are considered enemies. And it is true that Rahu in Cancer is considered to be pretty good, especially for politicians.
Think of the chart
Especially
of
for
Mahatma
politicians.
Think of the chart for Mahatma Gandhi. he has Libra Lagna, he has Rahu in the 10th house in Cancer.
Rahu with moon.
Was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? It's both. It's never just one thing, right? Now, there are ways in which Rahu and Ketu become Raja Yoga Karakas, right? If just Rahu in Cancer, I would have to say a lot is going to depend upon what happens to the moon, its dispositor, since Rahu to a large degree will always give the results of its dispositor.
In Mahatma Gandhi's case, moon itself is the dispositor of Rahu.
Correct.
And they're together.
So again, this is why I call this cookbook astrology, and I'm very much against it. You'll see this: Rahu in the 10th house means this. Rahu in Cancer means this. It's just,
but the classics are full of such sutras.
Yes, but they're only guidelines. They're only guidelines. You can't take, if you try to interpret dogmatically, literally like that, you'll go completely wrong. Take a hint.
Oh, well, somebody has corrected me. I think that question was from Ajit and not from Umesh.
Okay.
So, Vinayji, there is one of the student of the Mark has told 2 lines. Do you want me to speak, run that video?
Yeah, you may.
Okay. So if that's the case, I will quickly start this video.
Oh, Mr. Rohit.
I am a student of.
So can you hear?
And
yes.
I wanted to say a few things about Marc, his teaching, his approach to Jyotish. So I have been really blessed and have had the good fortune of learning Jyotish from Marc for a couple of years now. And it's been a real blessing in my life to have learned Jyotish from Marc in a way that I think is very correct, scientific, and something that can be applied to each and every chart. Marc goes about his teaching in a very, very scientific way. He tells you how to break down a chart, what to look for, and what to soak in, and how to basically infer from a chart. And it's a very systematic, scientific approach, which is the hallmark of his teaching. And, like I said, we've all been very blessed to have learned from him. And not only his teaching, even his teaching, which have been captured in books and his video sessions and everything. I'd really encourage everybody to go and take a look at the books that he's written. The books on yogas and the books on Laghu Parashri are absolute gems. I mean, for somebody learning Jyotish and getting to a point where they need to take the leap from a beginner to an advanced student, those books are absolute musts. And he has contributed immensely to this treasure trove, so to speak, of Jyotish. And it's a great thing that somebody who's starting out in Jyotish can tap into his books and his videos and everything and learn the subject in the right manner. So with that, I would just, like to say that, if anybody gets a chance to learn Jyotish or is looking to learn Jyotish going forward, Marc Boney is definitely my #1 recommendation for them. I hope you all stay healthy, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vinayji.
Namaste, everybody. My name is Rohit.
Well, that sounds like a paid endorsement. But,
now the question
but I didn't even know he was doing that.
Oh, then why did you pay him? Marc, thank you very much. It was wonderful talking to you.
I agree.
And we have so many similarities in our lives, and of course the cause of astrology is being served by both of us. So Meenakshi, over to you.
It was wonderful to reconnect with you, Vinay, and I hope sometime we're both at the Arsha video together and we could spend some time together.
Or else in Delhi.
Or in Delhi.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Lovely. So thank you for the wonderful interview. We had a quite successful event on the YouTube. There are many people watching us, and especially Sunil, John, Michael Sugarman. We're also giving the comment from the YouTube. So thanks for all of this. With that, we will really will not take a lot of time off people. It's still 1:30. We had scheduled the time, so we'll go more towards closing the session. So I will close the session with the closing mantra of Purnamida. Om Purnamida Purnamidam Purnamudakshate Purnascha Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Vinayji.
Namaste, everyone.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
You also. Bye-bye.
Thank you.